Good morning. Welcome to the Point. As we prepare for the legislature to head back to Lansing after Labor Day, we're trying to find out what's on their mind. What will the agenda be? We're talking to Democrats and Republicans to find out what they want to accomplish, starting with the Democratic leader, Representative Sam Singh. Representative, you lead the Democrats over in the House. You're going to head back to work here after Labor Day in session. I shouldn't say in work because I know legislators do a lot during the summer. Sure. In fact, you being here with us is part of your effort to talk about prescription drugs and some of the issues that you find that are facing Michiganders there. Tell me what your take is on that.
Well, one of the things that we've been hearing as we've been talking to residents across the state this summer is the high prescription drugs are becoming a real problem for families. People are making choices at times between whether they get their prescription drugs or decide to pay bills or bring food in to the table and so forth. And we've been wanting, obviously, the federal government to do something, and they're not doing enough. And so we decided it's time for us to do our own thing here in Michigan. So the House and Senate Democrats have proposed taking legislation that was brought forward in other states to bring more transparency. And so anytime a prescription drug company is going to increase their rates by more than 10%, we want a board to be able to evaluate that, take a look at the reasons why, and make sure that they have all of the information. We do that for other things like natural gas, so why wouldn't we do that for something that's life-saving for our citizens? And it's been done in other states, and that's why we want to do it here in Michigan.
In those other states, has it been effective? Have they said, no, you cannot raise your rates beyond this rate?
Well, we're not suggesting that we're putting any caps. What we want them to do is first tell us why they're raising their rates. We've seen, obviously, some of these really horrible situations where, for example, the EpiPen, which we now have in our schools and we are needed for life-saving for a lot of our kids, that costs $30 to make. And now they're selling it for $500. The farmer bro, Martin Scarelli, who just got convicted on another charge, was increasing HIV drug 5,000% and on costs and so forth. And the federal government's not doing enough, and that's why states have to do something. And that's part of our push to be able to take a look at why these things are happening. And if there is price gouging, then we want the Attorney General to be able to go after those companies, and having that evidence and that transparency will allow the Attorney General to go after these companies.
One of your colleagues with us on the show last week, Representative Winnie Brinks, and she was talking about health care in general, and we'll get back to the health care Bill of Rights in just a second. But in part of that discussion with her, and it dawns on me again talking to you, a lot of what you want to do pertaining to health care really still hinges on what happens in Washington, doesn't it? Even if nothing happens, there are considerable changes coming to the way Michigan's healthcare system will work just because of the Medicaid expansion and where those costs go, right?
Absolutely. One of the big concerns we've had with this inaction by the federal government, by the Republicans in Congress, as well as the president, is that the costs could be considerable here in the state of Michigan. We could have close to 1 million people lose health care coverage based on what they do in Washington, D.C. And so we wanted to do here in Michigan, there are things that a state can do. There's things that the state can provide, and that's why we pushed our health care Bill of Rights, basically saying that you should be required to have your kids on your health insurance till the age of 26. You shouldn't be able to charge 5 times the amount just because somebody's a senior citizen. Why have that high of a senior tax on people? We want to make sure that you have pre-existing conditions, that they're covered. Those are things the state can mandate and require, and that's why we wanted to start that conversation now, because we saw what was happening in Washington, D.C., but I was surprised by how limited I saw the conversation by my Republican colleagues. And just a couple times I saw the governor even talk about it at the beginning of the process, but at the end, he was very silent on the things that were happening in Washington, D.C., and we wanted to make sure that the citizens know that at least Democrats want to make sure that we're protecting their health care. And the good things that came out of legislation over the last few years should remain here in Michigan.
And again, back to, you say that the state can mandate those, but that would, if for some reason those provisions were taken out of a federal health care mandate, would that leave Michigan with a more stringent level perhaps than other states?
Absolutely. That's what you're beginning to see here in Washington, D.C., is that they're beginning to say, let the states make their decisions. And what we want to say is we like some of these provisions, making sure that a young person stays on their parents' health insurance, making sure that seniors don't get overtaxed on health care. We want to see those types of things. And those protections that were provided under the Affordable Care Act, we want to make sure that they stay here in Michigan. So we created this Bill of Rights. We're asking both Democrats and Republicans to say where they stand on those issues, because that's what citizens want to know. Whatever happens in D.C., we have a chance to be able to do things, and unfortunately right now my Republican colleagues have been very silent on what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Healthcare may rapidly become the roads bill of just a few years ago. Every time I sat down with a representative, it was all about roads, or infrastructure. And I know that's something that you have been concerned with, continue to be. Your take is still not enough cash in the pipeline.
Absolutely. If you saw the governor's report that came out of the infrastructure committee back in December, they say there's a $4 billion crisis. Part of that is roads and bridges, but also it's our water systems, our sewer systems, and so forth. We had proposed at least a minimum $100 million more into the infrastructure fund, and unfortunately my colleagues in the House zeroed out the budget. We were able to work in a bipartisan way with the governor to at least get it to $35 million, but still woefully short. And so we're going to continue this fall to have a priority about making sure that there's more money going towards the roads as well as to our water systems, because that is something that's going to be very important. And we know that we can do that, and we have to do it in a bipartisan fashion. But unfortunately, in the budget process, our colleagues did not want to put the money there. So we're going to make that a priority here in the fall.
If you were to find $65 million more to put into that fund, where would it come from, do you think?
Well, I think there was a variety of areas. We didn't have to put dollars and resources into some of the MEDC functions for economic development. We could have put them specifically into the infrastructure. There were a lot of decisions that were being made on a variety of different tax cuts that were being proposed that we would have actually wanted to put towards infrastructure. There is ways of taking the dollars that are currently actually in place and put it there. We would still like to revisit things. We had proposed over a year and a half ago that those who use the roads the most and damage the roads the most, including trucking companies and others, should be paying more. And so we would go back to some of those proposals as well. And so to me, we would need to have a comprehensive conversation on infrastructure, on roads, and on our bridges. What has happened in the past to increase funding is not enough. They actually did a report that showed that our roads are going to be worse in 2025 than they are today if we don't do anything. And so for us, roads and bridges and infrastructure spending is going to be a top priority.
When you talk about having those who use roads more pay more for them, there'll be a lot of people out there that say, well, wait a minute, that makes sense, but how would you do that? How would you regulate that?
Well, I think that's one of the areas that we wanted to take a look at. One of the areas for me is about how the trucking industry causes the most damage to roads. I think everybody knows that. We see that. But unfortunately, when we take a look at the fees that they are charged, we don't charge them enough. They actually have, in Michigan, we're double the federal limit on the amount of weight you can have on trucks. Why are we the only state that does that? I think we should stay at the federal limit, cut these weights by half. That'll save our roads and the longevity of those roads. And so there's a variety of those types of proposals that we have proposed in the past that we're going to continue to fight for because they're the right thing to do.
Another area where I know spending is a question for you, and I dare say every single one of your Democratic colleagues, because in the 20 plus years I've been wandering around the State House, there has never been unanimity when it comes to K through 12 funding. And you and I were talking just before we started this conversation that remains a question for you. So let me ask you a question this way, because I know there were studies being done. Do we have any good parameter, any good marker that says this is what it costs to educate a child for a year or for 12 years? Is there some kind of a standard that we can look at?
Well, there is. Other states have actually done this, and one of the things that the governor did over a year and a half ago on the urging by Democrats was put forward an advocacy study. That came back this last fall, and it showed that we're about $1,200 per pupil in underfunding all across the state. So it's not just happening in urban school districts, but it's happening in rural school districts and suburban school districts. And that's why you're seeing the higher classroom sizes. That's why you're seeing teacher layoffs and a variety of other things that are happening in some of your best funded school districts across the state. And for us, as the school aid fund is one of the only areas that's really growing in the state budget, we've been saying use those dollars, put them directly towards those schools so we can catch up and make sure that that $1,200 per pupil area is actually dealt with. And unfortunately, again, we had an opportunity within this budget, and unfortunately that did not occur.
Now, the money that you're talking about, I suspect, you will correct me if I'm wrong, is the money that the governor has earmarked to go towards teacher retirement systems, the extra funds?
Well, there is part of that. That was part of the conversation that we had in the spring and early summer, is that we felt that there are ways to solve the insolvency with the teacher pension program without creating undue burden. And I think the way the governor and the Republicans have pushed for, that's actually going to cost us more money and not actually bring down the long-term debt. And for us, we rather have let with the long-term debt and solve that problem, but they did a variety of other things that did not help solve the problem. And so they were taking that money out of the school district to pay for that debt, but it's not going into the classrooms, to those teachers and to the kids that need it the most.
Is it ultimately going to be a case of putting more money in the school aid fund? Because if I was just trying to do the math, it's about $56 billion for the entire budget. About $14 billion of that goes to the school aid, which is a big portion.
Well, a big portion of it has actually been siphoned off from the K through 12. The governor has taken about $400 million plus and put it towards higher education, whether it's community colleges or public universities, and that's fine. But before 2010, we never took money out of the school aid fund for higher education. It always went for K through 12 funding, and that's really the area that we have to get back to. Put all of the money in the school aid fund back to K through 12. When our voters voted for proposal higher education, and so to me, we should be funding higher education through other venues, but all the school aid money can go there. And once you put that money back, you'll solve that huge gap of $1,200 per pupil, and those school classroom sizes will go down. And that's what every parent wants. They want the teacher to be able to be effective in their classroom, and having the ratio down at a level that other states have is the best way to do it.
Of course, exactly what happens when the legislature heads back to Lansing is anybody's guess. Democrats are in the minority. Republicans, of course, set the agenda, but there's not even unanimity on the Republican side. We'll talk more about that when we continue this morning's program, To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We've spent our last couple of weeks talking to legislators about what they would like to do in the second half of the session. They'll head back after Labor Day, and we're talking to House members this morning. You just heard from the Democratic leader. Now to the Republican side of the aisle and one Ottawa County member and what she would like to see in the coming session. Representative, it's that time of year that a lot of people are preparing to go back to school. You are preparing to go back to session. You've been in district all summer long, but part of that has to do with schools because you've been working on some of the preparation for teachers, how to get teachers in the classroom more prepared for the new STEM education and the new economy coming, and the, see if I get this right, Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA that we talked with the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, about when she was in town just a few weeks ago. Let's start with that. The ESSA is a plan that the state of Michigan has put together, submitted to the Department of Education, and they're making some modifications.
Correct. So the ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act, is authorized by Congress. It has had many names before, like No Child Left Behind or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it's just the new iteration of our K-12, plan for how we're implementing education in the states. Thankfully, we're putting more emphasis on local districts, on states again, instead of a heavy federal footprint. So it's allowed us as a state to come up with a comprehensive plan of how we're going to prepare our students, how we're going to hold our institutions accountable at the K-12 level, and prepare them for this economy that we're living in.
There are a lot of things that change going forward with education, and it doesn't take it's not even generational. It can be just a few years, but we're in a much different situation today, for example, than we were in the early 2000s,
yes,
when nobody was expecting there to be this big push for skilled trades, for example. And right now in the state, we could use a lot more folks with skilled trades abilities.
Absolutely. So we work a lot at the local level with our businesses. So earlier today, I had a business roundtable talking with them, and what always comes up is talent, the need for prepared talent, and how are we preparing our students for the workforce and retaining our talent. And so part of us having flexibility at the state level to put in place an education system that makes sense for Michigan is looking at our skilled labor and what we need to do to try to change our system to prepare our students to go directly into the skilled trades, which is very much needed. I talk to businesses every day. It comes up that they're short on employees. We benefit from very low unemployment here in West Michigan, Ottawa County, and Kent County. And so what do we need to do to be more flexible at the state level to get our kids into jobs?
And a lot of that is not necessarily reinventing the wheel, because there was a time when skilled trades were taught at the high school level. I know a lot of that is now being farmed out to community colleges that already have the resource for it, but it really is something that we used to do and we don't do as much now.
That's absolutely correct. So when Michigan put in place its merit curriculum, we actually focused on every child and every student going into a four-year college situation, where we know that there are plenty of opportunities at the community college level. They have very nimble programming, so they can work directly with an employer to create a program. But now it's time to redirect resources and plan for how we reinstitute skilled trades into our K-12 curriculum. This year in the budget, we included funds for our K-12 schools to be able to buy equipment so that we can teach those skills again. I went to West Ottawa High School, and I remember we had a very robust program, and we had to let teachers go, and they left the state, and now we're having to find teachers to teach in those programs, and we're having to make investment into the actual equipment in the schools so we can teach these things to our kids.
And let's be clear what some of these things might be. For example, I was over at MTech here in Kent County not long ago, and one of the focuses is welding. And again, we're talking about very sophisticated equipment that you're using to weld, but you're also talking about a relatively short period of training and ready-made jobs that, as the governor would say, are well-paying jobs.
Absolutely. So we're talking about welding, we're talking about mechanics for large vehicles, for the vehicles that we drive every day that are changing. They're no longer, the parts and pieces that we're used to seeing, but they're computer-based now. And so preparing kids for those skills is what we're really looking to do. We have the Kent ISD, the Ottawa ISD that are providing these programs, but one of the problems we now have in Ottawa County is that we're at about 98% capacity for those programs. So we have to be thoughtful about how we reincorporate this curriculum back into the traditional K-12 setting.
When you talk to businesses, and I want to get more about some of their other needs, but when you talk to them about talent, one of the things I hear is that beyond the skill set that's needed, a lot of them just have people who are willing to stick with it. That they have to have people that show up, get there, and you have to do it every day. The old adage about 90% of your job is showing up. Do businesses, when they talk to you, express concerns about just finding enough bodies who will actually be there?
Yes, so they express concern about enough bodies, if they will stay past a 90-day period of time, if they're looking for a 50-cent premium or a dollar premium at a different location. What I want a lot of people to understand is that if you are willing to go into a manufacturing environment, most companies nowadays are willing to train you. They will take on the expense of training you, of showing you what that pipeline might look for you, what opportunity might look like for you in their company. And we just need people to take the challenge to stay at their job, show up on time, and to be open to the possibility of what they could be doing for a company that could be, in a supervisor role, or could get a certificate of some sort with whatever they're doing. It could be welding, it could be something else, CNC operator, for instance. And we have a lot of businesses who are willing to invest in people, and we just need people to invest in.
Think about what a sea change that is. 10 years ago, if we were sitting here, we wouldn't be talking about training for jobs. We wouldn't talk about openings for jobs. We would simply be talking about people trying to save their homes for foreclosure, keep their heads above water. I mean, 10 years, I know for some people that seems like a long time, but perhaps my perspective of age doesn't make it seem so long. I mean, that's really a big change in the state.
It is a very big change, and it's a good change for us to have. With that, I think there are some unintended consequences. The state, worked really hard to make sure that we created a business climate where we had opportunity and jobs available, and now we're on phase 2 of trying to make sure that we're showing kids when they're in younger grades, showing parents what the job skill sets are needed for the future so that we can fill those jobs, we can help our employers, but continue to invest in our K-12 systems as well. But it's quite a change from the lost decade that we have to now. We're seeing an era of prosperity, and we just need to make sure that we're continuing to move that ball forward.
Roger Curtis is in charge of talent over at MEDC, and one of the things that he says is that everybody who interacts with those students, from their parents, to their teachers, to their counselors, to their coaches, all of those folks have to have a mind reset that says going into skilled trades is not the sometimes grimy environment that it was 30 years ago. I mean, we're walking into pretty pristine manufacturing places. I was out in one in Ottawa County just this past week that's far cleaner than either of my son's rooms. I mean, so it is a different type of environment than it was.
Absolutely. I mean, we have these beautiful facilities. I think what we need to do is put more emphasis on getting teachers into the facilities, in our manufacturing facilities. For example, JR Automation. They're robots. People are being trained to operate them, being trained on the electronics to fix them when they're broken. We need parents to come in and see the opportunities that are available for their students for jobs that are, will gain them a $70,000 salary or a $50,000 salary. These are good jobs. We need to change the hearts and minds of everyone who, has a child, interacts with a child, who knows a business person, has programming. And we're very fortunate in West Michigan because I think a lot of our businesses and our K-12 systems, we want to interact with each other and we want to show each other what's possible. And we're doing a lot of this without government assistance. And we're creating programs. Internships are important. It's a lot has changed over the last 10 years and we need to continue that momentum. So everywhere I go, I talk about education, I talk about parents, and I talk about our workforce because they're intricately tied together. And we need to do a better job at the state of sending out that message like Mr. Curtis is doing for the state of Michigan, saying what opportunities are out there.
Let's shift gears a little bit because I know you have been talking with business, had a couple of business roundtables before you came to visit with us. And I'm always interested in what they see on the horizon or what their needs are. Obviously, skilled trades, obviously, people who are willing to work, all of those things, that's always something business needs. But in this environment where the unemployment rate is so low, competition for workers is so high, and the business environment for most areas is quite good, what are they telling you? What is their attitude about this economy?
I think they're very excited that we have opportunity everywhere you look. We have signs on buses, we have signs on sidewalks saying apply within, there is opportunity for you here in West Michigan. I think they've identified a couple of challenges though that we're going to need to address as we move forward, which is a result of us changing our business climate. One of which is affordable housing, or what we call workforce housing. We have a significant gap between low-income housing and then the houses that are at the $200,000 range. So how do we bring in employees for the jobs that we need to fill, but also provide them with the opportunity to live in our communities? The second issue that they are bringing up is transportation. So we have the jobs. Are there areas where we now have to figure out how we get people into Ottawa County, into Kent County, into Allegan County to work to fill those jobs? I think we're very fortunate here. Again, we look for opportunity to get involved and to act. But those are some issues that we're going to have to address and have come up as we've been talking to business owners.
About 60 seconds left, headed back to Lansing for the legislative session that will run through, probably into early December. What's on the agenda? What do you expect to take center stage?
So I think we'll continue to talk about, get prepared for the next budget cycle. We're always talking about what we've allocated in terms of resources. We have a roads bill that is going to be coming up in the tune of $600 million that we're going to have to pay for and come out of general fund. We have to be cognizant and make sure that we're taking a look at what we've spent. We're going to, I personally am working on education and that workforce and trying to, how do we better prepare our teachers for the next century of learning and the next century of our economy, not the last century, and figuring out how we can help our residents in the state of Michigan and in West Michigan.
So sometime after Labor Day, the legislature will head back to Lansing, and so will we. There's a lot to be considered. You've heard some of it here this morning, and our conversations will continue, and we'll be back with more to the point. Of course, it's not just what's going on in Lansing, but what's going on in Washington. All the legislators will be heading back to their respective caucuses soon, and we'll be following that as you join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To The Point.